I'm going to start this video with a thought, and this might sound quite blunt, but I mean it. I'm sincere about this. I think there are few things more pathetic than a grown man who cannot control himself because of the outcome of a sporting event. That is, if his team wins or loses. I think it's utterly pathetic. And there's a lot of guys who can't. They can't seem to control themselves. It's like the whole life revolves around this. And that's sad. It's just pathetic, in my opinion. Now, I get that if you have a big sporting event like the Football World Cup or Olympic events, or perhaps a high profile boxing match or rugby match, or you name it, people can get into the spirit of that. There can be patriotism involved, there can be civic pride involved in the case of football with teams. I don't dismiss that. I understand there is something in that. Studies have even suggested that the number of there's a correlation between how well a city does, how well its football team does, and heart attacks. I mean, I think it would be hard to really prove something like that, but I could believe that it's a bit like when the national grid used to allow for kettles to be turned on at a certain time during commercial breaks. Um, High profile events. Um, but I've seen footage recently of Japan football fans, and they really are a shining example, not just to this country, but to the world. What do they do when their teams win? I believe the Japan team has done well so far. They clean up, actually clean up the stands. They get bags and they clean up. Now, no one's making them do this. The Qatari authorities aren't asking them to do it. Whichever host country they're in aren't asking them to do it. It's just a question of respect and behaving in a civilized way. What do our fans do, or I should say, a segment of our fans? I'm not generalizing, I'm not demonizing all England fans, but nor is it just a few individuals. What do? They get boozed up, they throw their weight around, they fight with the police, they vandalize, they throw their rubbish everywhere. They basically just make an ass out of themselves. I saw a video the other day. I'm not sure what the context was. Like, I don't know what particular event it was. I'm assuming it was summer because they were dressed in summer clothes. But they were literally sliding down the carriage of a London Underground train. The person who posted it said it was a tube train, but there weren't any other details. With booze all over the surface. Now, they probably think it's a great laugh in the moment, but the thing is, someone else has to clean up after them. Probably a low paid council worker. That's the thing. These sort of things, I've heard the excuses. Oh, they're just having fun. It's a carnival atmosphere. Their team's done well. That's complete rubbish. Because you can have a good time, you can have a carnival atmosphere without acting like an animal. It's actually, it disgusts me and it makes me quite angry because it's so selfish. And it's more than that. It's more than just the physical damage and the fact that someone has to clean up after them. It can actually be quite intimidating. Now, I've been on public transport more times than I would have liked to recall, where a match has gone on and then football supporters have got on and they're all tanked up and they're shouting and they certainly haven't paid for tickets. It happened a while back. I was coming back from Newcastle on the Town and Way Metro, and you just knew a match was on because there was a lot of people around, and I didn't know that in advance. If I had, I may have went on another day. But I don't drive, so I had no choice. It's the only way to get back. Get a bus, but it would be the same story. Plus, it's just not as straightforward. There's several different routes, and not it's not as straightforward. So I got the metro and stuck on a carriage with a bunch of football louts. Now, they're not being violent, not attacking anyone, but it's an unpleasant atmosphere when you're just trying to mind your own business and people are shouting and throwing the weight around. It's unpleasant because the problem with drunken behaviour is people don't really know what their own actions are. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a saint. I've been drunk in the past. in house parties, and I've probably done things that I shouldn't have done. But I can honestly say I've never acted like a lout in public. I've never, vandalized something. I've never got onto public transport and just shouted at my mates and just it's utterly obnoxious. And I think that we're a soft touch. I think there is not. I think the consequences are too lenient. I mean, a lot's been spoken about around racism in football. Good, that should be tackled. But there is actually a wider problem here with just loutishness. You know, in the 70s and 80s, the problem was so bad with football hooliganism that it was called the British disease or the English disease. It isn't just England. Scotland also has a problem with this. Um, and that was seen as sort of the bad era, and we sort of thought we finally moved on, sort of around the 2000s to 2010s. But then you had a number of incidents at different events where that ugly old behaviour just came back. So I'm not sure if it's totally gone at all. Well, it's not. That's the answer. It's not. But it pisses me off when people make excuses for this. These are grown men. They're not children. Okay, have some damn self control. Being in high spirits is not an excuse to act like that. By all means, have fun. Have a few drinks. But just this thing about throwing their weight around in the 2021, I think it was Euro Cup final. I may be getting that wrong. I'm not sure precisely the event, but a bunch of them got into the IKEA store in London after England beat Sweden. And what do? They basically throw their weight around, jumping on the furniture and stuff. Now, if that's how they behave when we win, imagine if we lose. Then it can get even uglier. It could be violence. Because, I mentioned football hooliganism. I think a lot of people would say, oh, this isn't hooliganism. It's just a bit of banter. It's just some young lad having a good time. It's not hooliganism in the sense that it's not violent necessarily. It's not, you know, um, guys beating the hell out of each other. But it's loutishness, which is hooligans' twin. The two are closely related. Hooliganism's a bit more organized. It's a bit more. It's less spontaneous. It's more organized, and you have particular rivalries and firms and so on. It is what it is. I actually think maybe the problem we have today is better described as loutishness than hooliganism, but that doesn't mean it's any less of a problem. You know, Possibly it's an even bigger problem. Hooligans, I mean, as much as I've got contempt for them, um, they tended to be sort of their problems tended to be kind of organized, and it was fights in particular pubs or among themselves, but it could be very scary at times for civilized people who had to, walk past or put up with them. Um, but anyone who's ever been on public transport with a bunch of drunks, it's very unpleasant. And I must admit, I sometimes feel anxious. I mean, I know in the back of my head they probably won't do anything to me personally, but it's just very obnoxious. I'm trying to, especially if you're tired, you just want to get home. It's disgusting. I think what they should do is should have transit systems like the Tyne and Wear Metro, the London Underground, should designate particular garages just for football supporters and have stewards guide them onto that carriage so that they're just putting up with themselves. No one else has to put up with them. Any damage it's caused, that can also make it easier to identify them. But I don't think other people should have to put up with them. Um, and I'm not saying there's a quick fix. I'm not expecting anything to change immediately. I also am not saying that this is a unique problem to England. There's other countries I could think of that have a very serious problem, maybe even an even worse problem than we do. Russia, of course. The Russian ultras are very notorious. They often have neo-Nazi connections. Turkey has a serious problem. Italy has its ultras, although I understand that's a bit more choreographed, still violent behavior, but they don't necessarily take over civilian areas in the same way. Um, North African countries like Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, have a very serious problem with this. In 2012, dozens were killed in football violence in Egypt. And there may have been political overlap there because of the situation in the country at the time. Indonesia, we know about that big disaster that happened a few months ago in the stadium in Malang on Java. Interesting thing, when I contact my Indonesian friend, basically sent my condolences for the tragedy. She had quite a hard attitude. She basically had little sympathy for them because there had been a pitch invasion. And apparently Indonesia has quite a serious problem with football violence as well. So this is not unique to England. I think the problem with loutishness, perhaps the difference is it crosses into wider society in a different way. I think with those other examples, it's more, I could be wrong about this, but I think it's specific to sports. I think with England, we have this problem that any town or city centre at night time, it's basically depressing. It's, I walk past certain bars in Sunderland and just loud music, just drunks shouting at each other, very unpleasant. I don't like going out in this country. I don't trust that you won't have some idiot that wants to start trouble, or I just don't think it's a pleasant environment. And I'm not Puritan. I enjoy a drink as much as the next person, or two, or three. I'm no Puritan. But I think we've got a problem. And I think the only way this changes is certainly there has to be tougher consequences. I would make them clean it up. I'd identify them and make them clean it up. But I think that's one side of it. I think we actually have to tackle the culture. And we have to be honest, there's a problem in this country with alcohol and bad behavior. Now, again, you can find this all over the world, but I do think there's a specific problem in this country. And it's disgusting. I think it's one of the worst things about Britain. I love my country. There's a lot of things I love about the UK, but our job culture is not one of them. I think it's a national embarrassment. Whenever I'm with foreign friends, it's not been often recently, but in the past when I've been with foreign friends and, drunks have behaved the way they do, it's frankly embarrassing. And I feel almost like I have to apologize. Um, but the Japan fans, they're exemplary. I do not expect that to happen with the England fans anytime soon. Of course, it's not everyone. Of course, you have good people who just enjoy the match and they have a drink or two and they go home. Um, but the problem is when you get young men together, it's this invincibility attitude. Like they're with their friends, they could do whatever they want. And they may think it's harmless, but they have to understand, they have to see how that can be intimidating to other people. Plus, it's selfish. What if they, let's say, had a relative who was running a business and some strangers just broke into that shop and threw their weight around because they were celebrating a win in a football match? I think football has a particular problem. But as we saw with the trouble in Leicester recently, cricket, ironically, the genteel sport of cricket, although that was perhaps more specific between Indian and Pakistani fans in that city. Um, Boxing, unfortunately, has also had this behaviour on occasion. Probably not as bad as football, but I remember the Hay Klitschko fight 10 years ago. Actually, the Hay fans were behaving like animals. Booing the Ukrainian national anthem, showing disrespect to a man who deserves a lot more. The Klitschkos are legends, in my opinion. They did not deserve that. Hay done nothing to counter it. He probably encouraged it. So there's this loutishness in among British sports fans. It's a national embarrassment. It's not something to be proud of. It's something we should try to rein in. I think examples should be made of them, because this is how much of the world sees us. Um, so Qatar's drinking ban, a lot's been made of that. Here's how I see it. In principle, I don't actually disagree with what Infantino said about you could go for a few hours without drink. The problem with Qatar is twofold, threefold, in fact. It's number one, they haven't been consistent. They had years to prepare for this World Cup. They should have stipulated that from the start. In Qatar, alcohol is forbidden, so that's part of, we won't allow alcohol. They change it at the last minute. Now that's underhand, it's disingenuous. Secondly, it's not a universal ban. They're allowing the elite to drink in their boxes. VIPs can drink. It's not consistent. Um, yeah. So I think that the way they've handled it isn't good. However, frankly, a lot of people who support Qatar and the Qatari position will point to British football louts and say, well, that's why you can't drink. You can't be trusted. That's how you behave when you drink. Now, frankly, I think if they behaved like that in a conservative Islamic country, they would feel the consequences. I feel they'd end up serving long prison sentences and goodness knows what else. And quite honestly, I'd have limited sympathy. You know, why should the Foreign Office stick its neck out to defend idiots? It's very different when you have cases where someone is caught up and they're genuinely innocent. And in a lot of these countries, you know, forget due process, they're extremely corrupt legal systems. But frankly, British football hooligans, if they behave like idiots abroad, and as long as it's clear cut, you know, that they are definitely identified and it's not mistaken with somebody else, I've limited sympathy with them, but I think we need a cultural revolution of sorts. I'm not talking about the bloody Chinese version. I'm talking about a societal change in attitudes that stops making excuses for this. Because whilst a lot of people condemn this behaviour, I saw this on the video about the idiot sliding down the tube train. I would say about 70% of the comments were condemning them, but there was a sizable minority that was literally saying, oh, just some lads having banter, just some young guys having a good time. So there's this contingent of apologists, and you always get this with bad behaviour. It's like the Just Stop Oil people. There'll be apologists for that who will say, oh, but it brings attention to the cause. Antisocial behavior is antisocial behavior, whether it's under the banner of political activism or whether it's just opportunistic from celebrating a sporting victory. It's disgusting, in my opinion. And civilized people do not behave that way. Um, so at the risk of just repeating myself, will round this up. But it's unfortunately, it's absolutely predictable every single time. You know, football associations will condemn it, politicians condemn it, but it happens every single time. So clearly, we need to do something differently. I think there should be some creative punishments. Just offering them a fine a week later probably doesn't cut it. I think, you know, march them back the same evening, make them clean up the mess. And I know there's practical issues when you have hundreds of them involved. The police probably literally can't arrest all of them. But I think the Met should arrest as many as they can. As for police officers who are corrupt, this has been a problem recently. Any police officer who's off duty and engages in this behaviour should immediately lose their job and be charged. It's not very reassuring when the Metropolitan Police itself has convicted criminals in their ranks. This is a serious problem because it intimidates the rest of the public. Someone else has to clean up after them, and it's a national disgrace. Um, So if you're going to make excuses for them, you know, I will push back because I do feel strongly about this. And yeah, if you agree with me, what do you think the best approach is? Because banning alcohol probably isn't the answer. It's probably not realistic. But I do think there can be maybe quotas. In the United States, they haven't had quite the same problems, but there was a music event in the late 70s where they had this promotional thing at a Chicago sporting event. I forget what it was now, but it became notorious. A local DJ, they had this promotional event where it was basically unlimited booze. The result, not surprisingly, was absolute chaos. A complete riot, vandalism, damage, extensive damage, you know. So maybe not ban alcohol, but have some sort of limit on how much people can buy, like free maximum, something like that, free pints maximum. Have designated coaches. I think there's more that can be done. I think on public transport, have designated coaches so that other people don't have to put up with them. Um, and yeah, there needs to be prosecution for any criminal damage or assaults or anything like that. But we also, this is very, very important, we need to really push a change in cultural attitudes. And anyone who supports it, anyone who justifies this needs to be I think it should be stigmatized, quite frankly. I'm not a Puritan. I'm not saying people shouldn't enjoy themselves, but we have a problem.